Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And this morning on Cool Your Heels with Lillian, our special guest is Jay Sanchez, who is going to tell you a little story about his heart. And then we're going to go and discuss why his story is so important to today's audience. So good morning, Jay. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Great. So could you just please give a little bit of a background of what happened to you and how you survived the attack?
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief, although, I'm kind of passionate about this. But it was 4 years ago. I was in the military. I'm still in the military. I was, doing all the right things. I was dieting, exercise. With the military, you have to exercise. I was a indoor group cycling instructor. So I had gone to, I'd worked that day, went to my cycling class, and came home and called my daughter. At that time, my daughter was 4 years old. And this happened 4 years ago. So after talking to my daughter, and I don't remember the whole day, but just getting some background, what happened was something triggered me to drive myself to the local emergency room, which was about 2.5 miles from my home. I drove myself there, parked the car, walked up into the emergency room, walked up to the counter without saying a word. My eyes rolled back into my head. I fell forward, hit the front part of my head on the counter, fell backward, and hit the back of my head. Luckily, the ER doctor, female, she's about 5'1", or like 100 pounds. She leaped over the counter, immediately saw something was wrong, and started CPR. Well, to keep the long story short, 52 minutes of CPR. She broke like 3 ribs in my back, just doing compressions. They finally stabilized me enough after the 52 minutes. A couple important parts were I coded 2 more times within there. They had to shock me 4 times with the paddles. And the longest I was out was about 7 minutes with no heartbeat on my own. Luckily, the doctor didn't give up on me. And, to me, that was a miracle to begin with. So after they stabilized me enough with the trauma to my head, they had to do a CAT scan first to make sure there was no internal bleeding. Once they realized I was okay, they rushed me into the cath lab where they inserted 5 stents. It was a widowmaker, 100% blockage on both arteries. Put in 5 stents, put in the balloon pump, and then I went straight into ICU and went into a induced coma. Well, early the next morning, they were still trying to notify my family because they couldn't get a hold of anyone because my phone was locked. They had my military ID, so they called the base, got a hold of someone, and they finally got a hold of my colonel. He was going in to identify me to see if it was me or not. And at that point, the balloon pump failed. Now, luckily, I had some great doctors there because the Impella device was never used in my hospital up to this point, but they had it in Albuquerque, which is about 60 miles away. So they convinced the board, after much debate, to bring in the Impella device from Albuquerque, that it was my last-ditch effort since the balloon pump failed, that I was going into cardiac arrest again, nothing left to do. They drove up the Impella device. 2 great technicians came up, got it here within 40 minutes. They were must have been, in a hurry. So back in the cath lab, they get there with the Impella device, do what they need to do, get me back into the ICU. Now my family has been notified. They're showing up, still in the coma. and they're doing everything they can. They put in pretty much every IV that they could think of. Finally, just to get me stabilized, I was in the ICU in a coma for about 8 days. I had the Impella for 6, and they were giving me a 1% chance for survival. They were prepping my family that if I did survive, it was either going to be brain damaged or partial paralyzed. So they were preparing for the worst. I came out of my coma on the 8th day, just woke up, and to me it felt like I was asleep for like 5 hours. And a couple days later, they moved me out of the ICU, and a week and a half later, I walked out of the hospital on my own with my native heart.
That's a pretty impressive story. And you're one very lucky gentleman that you had such a good team that was assembled to take care of you, which also makes a big difference. But the point I want people to recognize is this. He was in good health. He ate a good diet, he exercised, and yet he knew that something was wrong with him. And most people really don't pay attention to when their bodies start talking to them that there may be something wrong with them. So if you had to look back on this journey, what are some of the signals that you would tell other men that they need to be aware of?
Well, one, I would say that the diet and exercise is the most important. I was a non-smoker, and my diet and exercise, talking with my doctors, they informed me that that was the number one step to survival. And, of course, with Impella, without those two and the motivation of my family and my daughter, I wouldn't have made it. But to get back to your question, I would say don't ignore the signs that are out there. I would encourage every male and female to at least do some research and see what the symptoms are. And if you do notice the symptoms, if anything else, at least pick up the phone and call and get advice. It doesn't hurt to call in. Don't be ashamed. It happens to everybody out there. It could be just anyone walking the streets that could be a victim to heart failure. And don't be afraid to listen to your body, and you know when something's wrong, and listen to your body and act on it.
And then I guess some of the other things is don't let your weight get to a point where you're maybe having to lean more heavily on your heart to process the blood and everything within your system, right? And if you're going to drink in moderation. I know a lot of people really don't want to hear these words, but I want to encourage people to really listen to what you have to say, because not everybody has access to a good military hospital to take care of them, or they can be further away from a hospital. I know some people who've had heart attacks, and they're put in the ambulance, and they're like an hour and a half away from the nearest facility.
Correct. And this was a civilian hospital, and like my doctor stated, you know, he doesn't recommend anyone to drive themselves to the ER, but he said in my case, if I did not drive myself and I waited for the ambulance, I probably would not have made it, just the fact of my circumstances. But yes, the diet and exercise, the smoking, the drinking, if you do everything in moderation, you know, you have a higher success rate.
Now, were you told to maybe take it easy for some of the other things that you're doing with your work?
Well, luckily, you know, with my rehab, and my patient, they would know that it's you think you're overdoing it, you want to hold back. But with my rehab, they were great. They taught me that if I didn't push through rehab, I wouldn't get back to where I was. And with, you know, to me, without Impella and without my religious belief in it without my family. But the Impella helped me keep my native heart, and they helped me with my heart recovery get back to a normal life. I was able to return back to my military career without any stipulations after 4 months of therapy.
That's terrific. Now, how did you work it with your daughter? Is she a young daughter? Is she a middle-aged type daughter, or is she past teenagehood?
No, when this happened 4 years ago, she was 4. She's 8 years old now, and I'm divorced, but she was my motivation to get me through this, and she was my inspiration. But it's been difficult at times, but, I try to encourage her to exercise as well and to plan her for the future to exercise. But she was my rock and what kept me motivated and kept me on the right track of recovery.
And folks, that's what you need sometimes. I know that when I was sick, my little one was 4 too. And you would be surprised how much they do understand if you tell them simply what's going on. And they take up the slack, and they get their friends involved as well, because their friends are their support group when daddy or mommy is down and under. So I think that's really great. Now, do you go out and talk to other people about your experiences and to relate to them what happens and sort of give them some pointers of what they need to be aware of?
Yes, matter of fact, every chance I get, not only through Impella, they're great because they have a whole team that really supports the patient, because that's what they're actually there for. And they've had me, I've gone into to Denver's in Boston and Massachusetts to their facility. They've had me go out and meet the team, that all the employees, and I talked in front of the team. And I've also gone out to D.C. with them and was able to talk out in D.C. and tell my story. So Impella has given me a good outreach to be able to tell my story. Also, I'm on the family advocacy board of my local hospital, so I get to talk there as well. And then with the military, every chance I get to talk, I go out and tell my story every chance I get, and they allow me to do that as well.
So that's good. So people have an understanding that sometimes things just happen, and they have to be prepared. And I suspect that your military training probably helped you get to the hospital on time for you to be treated. So instead of panicking, you sort of just did what you had to do. And sometimes people don't have the inner discipline to do that.
Yes, I believe, at that point I was already about 25 years of service. So that instinct just kicks in, that survivor mode kicks in, and just got me to the point where I had to do what I did and got myself the care I needed.
Terrific. Now, do you belong to any organization that, in addition, asks you to help them spread the word about men having heart attack risks without any known symptoms?
At this point, no other further organizations than the patient group of Impella and at the hospital, but no formal organizations at this point, no. But I would like to get some information and maybe look into that and be part of that as well.
I think it'd be a great idea, because I truly believe that men need to come out of the closet about their health, whether it's mental health or physical health or anything, or relationships or anything that they need to have some backup support in, because men for a long time have been pictured as the strong, silent type, and they don't need help from anybody. And that's not true, is it?
No, that's not, but that is a good point, especially in the military community. You don't want to be seen or known as the weak one, and it's a myth that's out there. But I believe the more that do come out and share information and share stories, which show vulnerabilities in that we are just humans and we do need to vent and to share our stories with others.
I think so too. So Jay, could you tell people where they can contact you and the hospital who also treated you in case they have some questions maybe for the doctors who are there, or they can find you on the World Wide Web?
On the web, I guess my point would be if you would reach out to Impella, to Shannon, she would be my point of contact, and that'd be a great place to start. And my local hospital is St. Vincent's Hospital in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But I think with Impella, that'd be a good place to start just for a reference point to get a hold of me. And I wouldn't mind anyone reaching out and talking.
Is there a phone number you can provide or an email that you can provide so people can do just that, to reach out?
Hey, Shannon, do you have a phone number available?
So we can give you an email address.
Okay, that would be terrific. Yes, it does.
And let me see. I think you want it stated on the call, or is that something we can provide after?
You can provide that. You can provide it to me, and I can provide it on the posting when we put it up with the audio.
Yeah, we'll do that. Now, so we'll figure out the best email.
Terrific. That way people have questions, or they have their own stories they want to share. I think the more people you can make aware of about men's health, especially in terms of heart attacks, the better off everybody will be concerned, because I think it's an important issue and it needs to be addressed, because the doctor doesn't always catch everything. And I'll share a story my neurologist shared with me. There was a gentleman he had as a patient who went in for a stress test for his heart. And he passed the stress test with flying colors. And then 1 week after, he dropped dead of a heart attack. So the point is that sometimes physicians don't always catch what's going on with your heart, even though they put you through some tests. Tests are not always a clear indication of what's going on. So, ladies and gentlemen, and adults of all ages, you can hear this interview with Jay Sanchez all over again about his heart attack on https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. Right-hand side of the page is the menu. Scroll down until you come to Cool Your Heroes. Click on it. You can also find it on amfm247.com Tuesday evening from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern. So that's amfm247.com/Cool Your Heels. You can also hear on Spreaker. You can hear it on iHeart, iTunes, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Amazon, Alexa, Podchaser, podcast, and a host of additional podcasts. And before we leave today, Montaigne had this to say in 1580, there are more books upon books than upon any other subject. Thank you all very much for listening, and remember, please keep wearing your mask. Thank you.